Okay. All right. I think we can start.
Session. I'm going to turn Ms. Tobin-Tyler, who's the associate professor at Brown School of Public Health. Liz is going to facilitate our panel conversation this afternoon, and I'm going to have her introduce our panel.
Thank you so much. I want to just say a special thank you to Amos House, Lemuel, and Eileen, and all of the amazing staff here for hosting this, and also to all of you that are visiting today from the 10 hospitals through the Americas Essential Hospitals Association background. We're really thrilled to have you in Rhode Island and share, as I know you have already this morning, we think some of the wonderful things happening in the state. And today we're going to hear from just a really extraordinary panel. So I want to sort of talk just initially about this topic. I understand this was a topic of great interest to many of you as you were thinking about things that you wanted to talk about and learn more about. The issue of maternal substance use obviously is not new, but it is an issue that has become obviously increasingly important with the opioid epidemic. It's also an issue that spans multiple systems. So it spans healthcare, it spans the criminal justice system, it spans the child welfare system, the court system. And so it brings together a lot of different sort of interdisciplinary professionals who are working sometimes in their silos. What we want to talk about today is the ways in which we can actually really engage professionally to do the best that we can as professionals for moms who are struggling with substance use disorders and for their kids and families. It also raises really important questions about racial equity and justice, as well as socioeconomic equity, and how we think about working with populations in an equitable way in these different systems so that we're ensuring that we can best keep families together and support moms and their children. So I am just so excited by the group of people that are here today on this panel. All of them in their own way are caring for mothers with substance use disorders and really working to protect and strengthen families. So I'm going to start on the end to introduce. I'm not going to give long introductions because that will take too much of our panel time and as short as it is. But just to tell you where they are and who they are, and then they'll expand a little bit on the work that they do as we talk more. So on my far left is Judge Gina Stuhlsatz, sorry. She is Associate Justice. Next to her is Jocelyn Hernandez. She is the coordinator here at Amos House of the Mother-Child Reunification Program. Hello. And next to Jocelyn is Dr. Mary Beth Sutter, who is a family medicine physician in Deckert and the academic director of the Maternal Child Health Program in Family Medicine. And then next to her is Ashley Deckert, who is director of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families in Rhode Island. She's been here just since May and has already phenomenal things that you'll hear about. And then finally, next to me is Kristen Cuddy, who is an attorney and guardian ad litem in the Rhode Island Court. So you can see we have an array of people working in different systems to address this really critical issue, and I think you're going to learn a lot from hearing from them. So I'm going to start with probably the hardest question. And I think what I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists, and I think we'll probably just go in order to keep things cool. So starting at Judge Stuhlsatz. And that is from your vantage point, when does maternal substance use definition neglect, which would require state intervention in Rhode Island, DCYF intervention? And start with you, Judge.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm so happy to be here and just the opportunity to speak to this audience and be live with a group of people is wonderful. So thank you for having us. And since we had a planning meeting, I've just given a lot of thought to this question because it's kind of what's the tipping point? You know, where do we need the government? But you know, already fraught with problems to even say that. But I think for me sitting on the bench, it's when somebody's substance use disorder interferes with their ability to meet their child's needs. So as we know, if you're already in the field in various ways, there's such a continuum of this, and we have substances that are legal to use, such presently marijuana and alcohol. And then we have our whole continuum to substances that should be life-threatening, you know, even with one dose. So it's to say, okay, what stage is this parent with their recovery? Are they in recovery? Do they have a support system? You know, it has become so individualized because we have a lot more supports than we used to. And we also have a lot more life-threatening substances than we used to. So, you know, the conversation has brought it both ways, in a good way because we have medically assisted treatment, and in a frightening way because we could be one day away from, most unfortunately, having to write deceased on that line in the court case. So I think that at the level of the hospital, everybody, I guess for globally, for this entire issue, everyone's trying to cover their family too. And that's part of this. And that shouldn't be part of the conversation of evaluating that individual parent and child, because that's not about them, it's about us. So I think that what I want to get past is feeling this panic, knee-jerk fear reaction when there's substances involved. The child was born positive, fill in the blank. So we can't possibly work with this. We've got to pull, or we've got a red flag from the department because there's a so-called history of substance abuse, which could mean like the universe, and say, oh my God, we don't want to be the ones to contradict that DCYF hold, so we're going to let them sort it out over at the court, I guess, or over at the department, you know. And I think that that's what does the greatest disservice, because that is not strength-based. That doesn't meet the person where they are today. I mean, I have cases still, even though we come and try to do so many, you know, trainings with medical professionals both ways to help even I say you go from white coat to black robe and nobody's listening, you know, that's how it feels to the family, right? And I think, you know, even medically assisted treatment is still getting flagged as substance abuse, quote unquote. And I have a parent who comes in, and I just want you to pause, guys, to try. You just had a C-section, okay? They took the baby away. You came there, you had all your documents, you knew your counselor's name, you have the phone number. I mean, this is some of the trainings that we did when I was a parent. I was representing parents at legal services. Like your go back to have a baby, if you have a substance abuse history or substance use disorder, as we wanted to call it, is very different. You got to call your stuff in there that shows what you're doing now to distinguish it from that red flag. And you've got to show all this stuff. And I still get, you know, well, they're baby's positive for buprenorphine, so we got to pull. And I'm like, can't we get past this? And I think, fortunately, our chief judge maintains 2 specialty courts where we really try to get involved to get what's really going on, because there's so many well-intended people who are doing everything wrong, myself included. But it's the opportunity to have the case come in very quickly and try to sort this out as quickly as possible, so that if that child can go home with mom from the hospital, or if the child can be returned to the home, because we can make a safety plan if it's removal that wasn't like right at that infant stage, we can figure out what that is. And one of the things I'm proud to speak about is that we have the Safe and Secure Baby Court, which is dealing with mostly young parents who are involved in the system themselves, which is a different kind of red flag, but you get waves just the same. And then parents who might be eligible to have further recovery support so they can take their child home. And that's our family treatment drug court, which we are changing to recovery court. Just has to match up with our grant money for a few more months. So try to say, okay, we're not going to pick which court anyone belongs in if they're eligible, because this is where I see the case every couple of weeks. I mean, we are trying to be on it like Sakana, figure out what's needed. And say, okay, we do a unified blind intake, and then after that parent's story has a chance to be told privately to our intake coordinator at the court, we then offer them whatever appears to match up with their needs. It's voluntary, so they can come in and they might be on medically assisted treatment, but because they were pregnant, they decided or were advised to forego psychotropic medication, which helps stabilize them. They come out, they are very proud because they are still in their recovery, but they have postpartum issues, you know, like, let's really look at this person, because I think we all have so much incoming now, you know, we have incoming from our phones, our computers, from warnings that we get to look out for this, and we kind of stop listening to the person who knows what's going on, who is that parent, and they are, you know, I anytime you generalize, you get in trouble, but I still do it. That is a moment of motivation. You just had a baby. You want to go home with your baby. I mean, you know, this is a moment to seize, not shy away from. And so anything we can do to say, we'll give you the kitchen sink, but let's get supports in here that recognize that, to circle back to the original question so others can get a chance. Is that, okay, so if we put this in, you can meet the needs of your child. That's all, you know, so if we do this, if we put this in, if we put in this number of checks, if we ramp up the screens, if that's the stage we're at, if we, you know, make sure you have mental health support, if that's gonna be, you know, a soft spot for you, and we're gonna check on you every couple of weeks instead of every 3 months, which is the typical DCYF calendar, so that, you know, not so we can catch something going wrong, but so we can troubleshoot in real time and kind of revise what's needed. So, you know, that's what I hope to achieve with every case, but, you know, if we can do it even half the time, I just feel like it's so much better than the old model, which was pull, get a certain number of clean screens, meantime, you see your baby, you know, once every 2 weeks for an hour, and then, I mean, for those of you who like babies, I do not, but every 2 weeks, right? Person, 2 weeks is a lot if you're, you know, a month old. So that's what we used to do. We used to wait for the parent to get quote unquote clean and then introduce them to their child and say, why aren't they bonding? How come, you know, the child has reacted? You know, we're trying to not do that because it really doesn't work, and everyone knows that, but is afraid to try other things. So I guess be not afraid. It's okay to say, it's okay to express confidence in someone's ability to succeed, you know, and then figure out how to help them. That's just like way more honest, satisfying, and productive than being afraid that, you know, we don't want to be the last one with the hot potato and then something happens. It's going to happen anyway in a certain number of cases, no matter what we do. So let's give them a chance to raise the question. That's my view. All right. So.
My So I mean, just Stuhlsatz explained it to the T. But from where I'm coming from, being the director of the Child Reunification program, our views are pretty much similar and the same. We want to see moms together and be able to care for their child, because newborn babies, new birth, that's the most important bonding time. You know, so we don't like to see moms removed from, children removed from their mother's care. And so we work closely with Baby Secure Corps, Family Drug Corps, in order to keep moms together with their child. I also believe DCYF should also be involved, just so that interventions could be put in place, but with good collaboration with other providers. So I'm gonna keep it short and sweet.
Thank you. I'm Mary Beth. I'm a family doctor and I do obstetrics, just for context. So I think this question is the hardest, honestly, for the doctor. I'll just put that out there. Because I think we come into a relationship with someone, giving birth with them, right? It's an extremely sacred time in life. Like, someone's trusting me with the most intimate parts of their body. They're literally trusting me with their life, with their child's life. And that's a big set of shoes to carry around, to carry that knowledge if you're knowing someone is using substances. So my short answer is, I feel like DCYF should almost never get involved in a perfect system. And I think that's always my aim, is that when I meet someone, I hope I meet them early enough so that I can create that go bag, as Judge Stuhlsatz is talking about, like, how can I create this positive evidence from the get-go? This person's participating in therapy, they're giving negative drug screens, we time those perfectly so we know that they're going to be negative. And so that's always what I hope for, that ideal situation, and obviously it can't always be that way. I think the medical system is particularly tricky because doctors are sort of raised to fit into this hierarchy, right? Like we learn that from day one in medicine, like you do what you're supposed to for the person above you. And so when we think about legal implications, that feels really real to us, right? So yes, there's certainly been times when I've been handed a form and I've been told to sign it, and I do sign it because I feel like I don't have a choice not to sign it. And I think that's something that really needs to be talked about more. And I've had the good fortune of talking a lot about that with Judge Stuhlsatz, and like completely blew my mind like a year ago that that was not the truth. And that doctors do have a say in this process. And I really look forward to building that relationship more with DCYF. I think we have a really small state here in Rhode Island, which is a blessing because we have the advantage of having the 6 of us here that we can talk and know each other. And I think that's not the same for every state. So I do really encourage you, being in other states, if you're in a position through your medical system, kind of think about making those relationships. You know that you're talking to another person, right? You're not talking to like an entity that's making a decision, right? You're talking to another person about another person. So I think that's where I'm gonna leave it. Oh, one more thing I want to say. So all of you know very well, you've been hearing all morning, right? Patients we're working with, people we're working with have a history of trauma, right? And that's the other thing, is that we really need to think about that coming to the table. Like, and that's a huge part of birth, right? That's a huge part of becoming a new parent as well. And that's something else sacred that we're carrying for the people that we're working with, that needs to come to the table when making these decisions as well.
Well, I'm Ashley, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to be before you all today. I think, Judge, I call her Judge Leah. I couldn't told that. I feel like I'm always saying it wrong. She defined the perfect terms of the original question. How do we, at what point does substance misuse become neglect? And the terminology that I use, because I come from the state of Illinois where I was trained as an investigator, is blatant disregard. And it's when, given all the resources and supports, this disease is so caring for the mother that she's not able to care for her child. And so I'm going to talk about where where the system used to be, where we are, and where we want to go, because we're in the midst of a paradigm shift. If you can't tell just by how we're thinking of and discussing substance misuse when it comes to newborns. So what it used to be, the system that it used to be for the department specifically, is we looked at the allegation that came in, and we look at the incident and we say, did this happen? And then amongst all of those things, because most of the time if you have a positive meconium and you're talking with the physician and it's clear that there is some substance use disorder, that it's going to be an indicated report. And then the next question becomes, is it enough for removal, or are there other things, safety plans that can be put in place? And what happened in the past, especially with people's biases, my thought is, most oftentimes kids were removed, and then they have to go through the whole process of dropping clean and going to court and doing the visit. Everything that Judge Leah described is what used to happen. And to some extent, what still happens, because we're in the midst of a paradigm shift. And so the shift that's happening right now where we are is practice change, getting people to really understand that substance misuse is a disorder, is a disease, and that there are opportunities to work with mothers and babies and look at doing this differently so that we preserve families. So my value as this new director, what the values that I've always had, is preservation of families. I'm not for removing kids unnecessarily. If we have to remove it, it should be the last resort, right? And so I think the challenge for the department, not only in Rhode Island, but I would like to say for any state that's in the midst of this paradigm shift, is really getting down to the staff who've been doing this for years the same way, and having them think differently about how we assess safety. And so right now, I think since 2019, Rhode Island, DCYF, we have a new practice model in the way that we assess safety, and we don't look at we don't go in with blinders looking at this one incident and saying if it happened or if it didn't happen. We're looking at the whole family and the whole situation. Okay, mom has a substance use disorder, but is dad using substances? And if he's never used and he's a support to his wife or his girlfriend, perhaps a removal isn't necessary, but we'll safety plan the baby to be with dad while mom works on treatment, or if there's a grandma or a sister in the house that could, so we not only look at the mom and her situation, but what other protective factors are in the home that could help support preserving a family, and then offering them all the supports and services that are necessary. Again, the challenge admittedly is getting people's minds to think differently about how we look at those situations. And so where we want to be, and I think we're on a path toward that, especially with the inception of plans of safe care, which I'm assuming some of you all have heard about. I think we're on the cusp of something really great in terms of when a parent feels like if a mom has a substance use disorder, she gets pregnant, there isn't this fear, helping parents or mothers eliminate the fear of being able to receive prenatal care and being honest about their use, so that their physician is helping them come up with a plan to stay clean. Does it mean Suboxone? What kind of treatment is necessary? And when those plans are in place, as a department, if we have to get called in because it happens to be a relapse, we're not looking at that incident. We're talking with the physician and the mom and saying, is there a plan of safe care? What's the plan? Can we get mom and baby into treatment? There's some practices that I've recently learned that we do here that I'm really assessing on Monday. We have a meeting to talk about it because one of the things that I learned we do, and I've got talking to them too, is we think the practice is historically been that a baby is, if there is a positive test for a baby, the baby is immediately removed from the mom, and so the department comes in and there's this separation. And I like clutched my pearls and gasped, because I'm like, there's no, unless there is a actual safety threat, something, this baby will die in this mother's care. There's no reason we need to be separating babies from moms until we can figure out how we can help and support the family. So we have a meeting coming up soon to talk through how we even shift the long-standing practice that doesn't need to be in place anymore. So hope that helps.
That's the perfect example of what Judge Leader was talking about. Nobody wants to get in trouble, right? Nobody wants to be the reason something bad happened. That's a perfect example of that.
So the only thing that I really can add to all of these great presenters at this point is just, so I'm a guardian ad litem, so my representation of the child doesn't actually start till the petition is filed by DCYF. Historically, the petitions were always filed as neglect petitions, right, against the mom, which is alleging that the parent failed to provide the child with a minimum degree of care or supervision. And now I think with Judge Stuhlsatz help, we're trying to encourage the department and also to the hospitals and everybody else is that it can be filed as a dependency, which means through no fault of the parents, right? That maybe they still need the support services or the help of either the court, the department, social service agencies, community partners, etc. But the child doesn't have to be removed, but there still would have that oversight of the court to potentially expand if they needed to, or to really just be there and to make sure that the department and is follows through with the services that they say that they're going to put in place to help the family and with actually the right services in order to protect the best interests of the child. So I think that all of the ideas and everything are great, and I do see, I just recently was assigned a case this week, and it's a reopening. Mom did relapse, but the children were able to be placed with dad, with mom in the house, but the family, as a result of the investigation, was moved into the home of the grandmother. So just that alone, during the first opening, the kids were pulled and put in a non-relative foster home. So just in those 3 years, there has been some shift on that forward. So, not everything they do, but that's one example of the fact that there is some. Yeah, thank you. That lays such a terrific foundation for the issues that we want to talk about. And I think, what we want to hone in on, and this is already evident from hearing from all of you, is the way that each of you are working sort of in your different system or profession work together or can work together to really support moms and babies and ensure that families can stay together. So I'm going to start with Judge Stuhlsatz, I don't know why.
Oh,
What did they say?
oh, yeah, it's fine, and not even boy, because I'm in regular.
Critical piece of this, which is we've got a lot of information. You sort of said, and about all this incoming information, how, how do you process that when you're making decisions and thinking about the best course of action? And so if you could talk a little bit about sort of what is the kind of information that you get from clinicians, from social workers, from others that are working with the family, and from the parent or mom themselves. How do you take in that information, and then how does that make you or help you to think about the best course of action for a mom that's struggling with substance use disorders?
Well, my first person I speak to in any case is the parent, because they just had a baby, and that seems right to me. So, honestly, how are you feeling? Then I've already had so many documents submitted, so there might be the paper that Dr. Mary Beth referred to that the physicians are sometimes asked to fill out is the physician's report of examination. So I have that. That's already, it's now in a computer, it used to be in a file. So I have that. I have a narrative that's been prepared at DCYF, an affidavit, somebody's sworn to having collected certain information that's part of what forms the foundation for them filing the case. So I have sometimes the assigned social worker, but sometimes it's only the investigator that hasn't progressed that far where a social caseworker has been assigned. But the first thing I do is greet the parent and ask them like to me the courtesy questions, and then sometimes that leads to a font of other information from that person who's understandably very distressed. So I say, okay, I'm gonna go through this in a certain kind of way. Those are the rules I have to follow. But I look at that physician's report of examination because that is supposed to be just what it sounds like. It's supposed to be the doctor's view of something they examined, which led them to be concerned about someone's health. It should not simply recite the reason that the child or parent is red flagged in the system, or the information that the investigator gave the hospital when they came over, because the hospital is mandated to call. So it should, the physician's report of examination to me is not a useful document unless it tells me something about information the doctor gathered. Because I mean, otherwise, I can get everything that DCYF is saying from the stuff they flag. So if it just says on there that parent presents with a history of substance abuse and my favorite, scant prenatal care, scant. So whatever that means, I don't know, maybe you didn't know you were pregnant right away, or you didn't go enough times or something, but so I'm like, okay, so what else do we have? If it says on there baby born positive for fentanyl in the system, that gives me information of medical fact about the child, about mom. That's a whole different kettle of fish. But if it's just indicating substance treatment, substance history, I want to hear from the parent. Well, what are you involved in now? I mean, what do you have? I also want to look at any report from the social worker at the hospital that might say, mother appeared bonded, prevented, has been with the child every minute, wants to breastfeed, made all prenatal appointments, that she had transportation for, I want a 3D picture, and so I'm trying to give weight to what seems to be based on reality rather than profiling. And so, that's kind of the departure point. And if the child has already been removed because there was that immediate removal because of a substance in the system, that parent is entitled to what's called the probable cause theory, where DCYF has to prove to the court that there's an ongoing substantial risk of imminent harm to the infant if the child returns to the parent. So that instant decision to remove might stand as completely warranted because everyone needs to know more if there's active substance use. But then DCYF still has the burden to show the court within 5 to 10 day window, depending on scheduling, what is there nothing we can do to mitigate this, or to have learned more about a family support system, just as Director Deckert described. So, you know, that hearing is available immediately. So I also want to communicate about that because that's going to be a whole other wave of information that's going to be an update since the vote. But I think that the idea that the child is necessarily safer with the immediate removal. I mean, everything I've read has said like the skin to skin immediate stuff is what calms that reaction that the child has from, you know, whatever substance is. And I also don't want to see a parent, I mean, the response of the child to the medically assisted treatment can look so much like the response the child has. So, you know, how come we, you know, vilify one and support the other? The baby needs the same thing in both cases. So why would we squander that chance to shore up that, you know, that stuff starts right out of the gate, you know, that bonding, you know, smell the parent, all this type of thing. And so, I don't want to miss out on that, even if we're sorting out other stuff. I'm so encouraged with this trend that I know the director supports of not foreclosing the parent from contact with the child. Because just imagine how that feels at the hospital too. It's one of those, oh no, she's not allowed there. And it's just setting up a whole, this is like a river of cortisol for everybody. This is not a good time. Whereas everybody could be comforted, motivated, inspired, healing right out of the gate. And we are gonna just say, oh, we can't take that chance. But what is gonna happen there? You know, women and infants, if you sit in the rocker, instead of looking through the glass while some volunteer grandmother holds your kid. It's just weird. So I say, you know, that's.
But it's not.
That's like, not be related to the child, it's important. So that's kind of my.
So Jocelyn, you work day to day with moms who have been separated from children. I think it would be really helpful for all of us to sort of hear specific examples or cases where you've worked with a mom in that situation, but in particular, kind of how have you interacted or worked with healthcare providers with DCYF, with others in the community when you've been there to be really an advocate and a support for that mom. And I'll ask you to sort of split the question, you know, when has that collaboration worked well for you and you feel like it was really beneficial, and maybe a case of the time where it didn't work so well and the result wasn't what you wanted. Okay.
So the Mother-Child Reunification Program is a therapeutic community. We provide services and support for the mother and the child, working closely with various providers for DCYF, Children and Friends, a lot of different providers. We also provide the services of therapy, one-on-one therapy, you know, relapse prevention to help moms stay sober, parenting skills, budgeting. There's all different types of programs that the women are able to engage in. So the first scenario I'm going to give is a scenario where I feel as though the collaboration didn't work well with providers. I had a mom. Actually, the children were school-age children. There wasn't a newborn involved. But this case was very difficult because I feel as though the providers were supportive at just. I feel as though, you know, mom came into the program, she already had almost a year clean and still wasn't reunified with her children. There was a lot of, you know, meetings, provider meetings that were taking place, and I feel as though instead of, you know, it was always what mom has done in the past or what mom is not doing versus what mom has done to accomplish, you know, being able to stay sober, being able to care for her child and still not being with her child. I also had to actually testify in court for this mom in order for mom to be unified with her children. And I feel as though the reunification was granted after we had this hearing is because it was the former judge of family drug court who knows and was very involved with the whole substance abuse piece. Before that, it was, just a family court judge. And I feel as though, you know, understanding and knowing the piece about substance abuse and being involved, I think the collaboration would have been. And the second case. Cases which actually have worked well in collaboration with providers and, you know, with these cases, the parents, like the mom was more involved in her case, hearing from her and letting her be able to tell us her needs and what's gonna help her and, you know, how is she gonna succeed, was really helpful and all the providers supporting this mom. You know, what is it that you need from the providers in order to be able to care for your child, in order to succeed? So when it's time to go out there and live on your own, you won't re-enter the system again. So I feel as though it varies, you know, I feel as though if providers have enough knowledge around substance abuse, then, you know, I think the collaboration around working with providers.
Yeah, and I think we'll pick up, I wanna talk, if there's time, obviously, about how we train all kinds of people, whether they're DCYF workers or they're clinicians or they're social workers in the communities, to think about assets as opposed to always sort of returning to, you know, what are the things that the mom isn't doing or, you know, what is the history that seems to come up a lot in this conversation. So Dr. Sutter, you really have a unique perspective as a clinician, as a family medicine doctor, because you work with, you know, the mom during pregnancy, during childbirth, postpartum, and then you continue to see the mom and the baby after that. So that, you know, you have this longitudinal perspective, which is pretty rare. So I'd love it if you could share some of your experiences working with moms and babies and families, and when they do become involved in DCYF, particularly the substance use, and kind of what are the things that you're thinking about once a family is engaged with DCYF as a clinician to be able to help continue to support that family.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a couple of stories that I wanted to talk about. One is a less happy story, so I'll start with that one. But very recently, we had a parent that was discovered on street outreach, actually, which it sounds like somebody who went on this morning. And I've had the good fortune of meeting with some of the street outreach folks months ago and kind of forming a relationship with them. So it's normally emergency room docs that go out, and they had called me because they weren't sure what to do. And had like done some dating ultrasound on this patient with a little butterfly ultrasound that you carry in your pocket. It was pretty amazing. So we already had a lot of information, and I was able to work with that ED doc over weeks to try to connect with this person. And I had gone out with her. We'd met like in a fast food restaurant, and had a really nice meeting where I was able to kind of like very gently crack the surface of like, hey, would you come see me in the office, and can I at least prescribe you some medicine for like nausea and things like this. So just like baby step in there, trying to gain some trust, right? And why was this person so mistrustful, right? You know, I think that stems back from, this was someone who had had 2 prior pregnancies where her children had been taken with DCYF, and she also herself was a child of DCYF, right? Like from her own mother. And I think that demonstrates an important thing that I've seen a number of times where, especially in Rhode Island, again, it's a small state, but because it's a small state, people know each other, right? So it's like the caseworker that was assigned to her for when she was an actual child is still maybe the same person that she might have had for her own first child. And this history just never dies, right? So this person was never, in my mind, given a chance to correct any of it, or even if she did correct some of it, like, would it even matter, right? Because what happened in the past, and that's kind of the point where she was at, right? So she was using some substances, more kind of like just because of where she was living, like that wasn't her main issue. Anyway, she fell out of contact, we lost her for a while, found her again, she finally came to the office. And it was pretty interesting, and she was able to come with her health worker, and that's the only reason she came, and it took like rescheduled to make it happen. And we found out she was severely anemic, and like had probably had a chronic placental eruption from stimulant use. And then we couldn't find her again. Like trying to get her in for delivery, it was just, oh my God, like those 4 days, I don't even know what I was thinking. We finally found her again, she did deliver, her baby's healthy. So, but she really, you know, she left the hospital, I don't know, half a day after she gave birth, with like a C-section scar back out, died, because she just didn't trust. She didn't trust anyone, and I think this is an example of like a really big, something I just hope I don't see again, you know, that I hope that we've done a better job establishing relationships all around with all of us to try to prevent these things from happening. And you know, her baby is wonderful and healthy, and he's with her partner's sister. So he's in family. And they're great. She is the cutest mom. So, you know, and I still care for them, and I still care for the birth mom as well. So that's a kind of more dramatic example, but I do think it's not rare that I hear this, that there are people living outside that are pregnant, that are needing abortion care, they're needing pregnancy care, that have children, maybe that aren't with them, or maybe they are with them. I think these are not rare stories, so I think it's important to talk about it. Kind of a less dramatic example than that, which is probably something is a mom that honestly all within herself, right? She took it upon herself. She got into recovery. She went to the residential treatment program we have for pregnant women, called Sara Arter here. She was able to get herself housing through Amos House. Her child has some medical needs that are more complex, and she is parenting, and part of that she like separated from her partner, and she's going to be a peer recovery coach. So there's a good example of like something that went really well, and I think everybody really organized around that. But also that person herself had an extreme amount of resilience that we were able to harness and help blossom. And yes, I'll take care of the two of them too, which is really nice to see them.
Thank you. It's very helpful to hear these stories, both
And
when they're on well and just have it. And how people do it all together, or what the challenges he made. So, Director Deckert, I had the pleasure of hearing you speak at the Department of Health conference a few weeks ago, and you talked about the need for people to become mandated supporters. As opposed to thinking about it just being a reporting role, then I think it is. You also have a DCYF, a substance use coordinator, who specifically works with families where there's substance use issues. So I wonder if you could just talk about this a little bit, kind of expand on your approach to supporting moms with substance use disorders, and really thinking about who are the community partners, or other kinds of professionals that you want to work with as DCYF director to do that in a way that's more successful.
Thank you for asking the question. Thanks, and also thank you for the plug about mandated supporting us, mandated reporting. And so for those who haven't heard that still, I just really would like to see, again, when I talk about paradigm shift, I'd like to see a system that becomes more about child and family well-being, because we call it child welfare, right? And when I think, when we hear the term child welfare, we think of just focusing on the child. And don't get me wrong, that's obviously very important. It's just like when I'm in conversations with my colleagues and everybody have to say the proverbial safety is important, safety is number one. No crap. Like we know that should have. And I think the same thing with the child welfare thing. You have to think about the whole family, because children won't thrive if their families or their parents aren't thriving. And so the idea is not something I coined, but I think I saw it birthed out of New York, actually. Columbia University created a training curriculum for mandated supporting to really try to highlight, and this is granted, this is a organization who actually wants the system be abolished, which I'm not all too far away from either. But I know that sounds really weird to say. But, right, you get my point around if we could, that's the extreme, but if we can work toward it, then we'll be a better system. So I keep going around and around, let me stay on topic. Self-supporting means that, you know, if you identify something and someone just needs help, don't feel like you have to call the child abuse hotline. We, you know, in Rhode Island in particular, and I think other, if this is catching fire in other states, they have one line. So when it doesn't feel like it rises to the level of abuse and neglect, but you just want to get some help for a family, identify what your state's warm line is and use that to help support the family, as opposed to feeling like you have to call the hammer, you know, the traumatic system that comes in and like really rocks people to their core. So back to your original question around collaborations. I think this is it. This is a really great example. So I couldn't be more like grateful for you all pulling this panel together. Especially because we're such a small state, we have an opportunity to break down the silos and start to have really deep conversations from everyone's perspective about how the system must change. And so I personally look forward to continuing conversations around the practice changes that we have to own as a system, right? We don't do this work well 100% of the time. We're a flawed system. It was created, you know, to be quite honest with you, there are some racist practices within our system, right? And when you think about the time it was born and how people were trained and their practice back then, though some of those things aren't they're still lingering. So we have a long way to go to where we can get to a place where, you know, like I desire people to think about our system as a helping system and not a hurting system. And so I think we have work to do, but I look forward to it. And I think we can make some real good practice changes, working together, really understanding from the physician's perspective what that scenario looks like at the hospital. I can provide our perspective as child protection, but there's still a place for that. And then we can, you know, hear from the family court or the attorneys. I think there is this, I come from a large state in Illinois, you know, from one end of the state to the next, the 6-hour drive. Here is what, less than 2 hours. Anybody.
So Kristen, I think, you know, we're talking about, obviously, safety is important. Everybody wants that, and everybody wants a child to be in a safe environment and for their family to thrive. So as an attorney who represents the interests of the child and really has to determine what that looks like, you know, how do you determine what's in the best interest of a child? Who do you talk to understand that? And then, you know, based on that process, how do you then advocate for your child's best interest?
Sure. So once we're appointed as the children's guardian, we have access right away to all the records. So we have whatever DCYF has filed with the court. We also have access to RICHIS, which is DCYF's database where the caseworkers keep track of all of their notes, placement information, educational information, etc. We do also meet with the children. Obviously, we go out into the home, the foster homes. We can go out and meet with parents directly, as well as the parents' attorneys, and then of course all of you should be there. We get a wealth of our information from the providers that are working with the family, both the parents and with the child. So, I mean, I just want to start off by saying that it's been my experience in the last 6 years since I've been doing this, that all of the reports that come to the court, either through DCYF or directly from you all that are working with the families, are really held in the highest regard. And that information is 100% relayed on time, you know, with most credibility that can possibly be given to it directly to the court. Even if we don't necessarily always get back to you, or DCYF social workers don't always respond back to you about maybe the outcome of the case or what happened, and everybody's worried about confidentiality and sharing things, but the information is taken in, it is used, and it is extremely crucial to the children and their best interest. So keep it coming, it's so important. I just really want to touch on that. And then from there, I mean, we, you know, where the mom or the dad are in their treatment. If it's just a more recent relapse, or if they were engaged prior to the case opening, and then what the recommendations are from the substance use team, as to what supports are needed to be in place in order to have increased visitation, unsupervised visitation, and then moving towards reunification. The cases, you know, in family treatment drug court, especially that implemented Judge Stuhlsatz that, you know, move the quickest are when the parents are involved in a program like Amos House. There are a few Amos House type programs in Rhode Island, but you know, Amos House really has like that gold star of wraparound support for the families. And when I have a child that I'm representing that could be reunified in the setting like this one, with the case management support, with the Jocelyn and her team around, that's going to give me the feedback on how they're doing, even with the parenting skills, because there are other obviously coexisting issues. It's not just the substance use. And getting that feedback is just so important, obviously, for us to make sure that safety is happening. When the families are here, that's really when we can, you know, move the cases forward with those safety plans, with that's really timely reunification. So I would just want to say that we need more Amos houses, we need more beds. You know, we need more of those programs around for the families in order to
Get us the funding.
yeah. And then, you know, the case management support is also crucial. We talk about this a lot with our young moms and baby court, and dads, that, you know, they may just need somebody either from your practice or social workers that work at the hospital, or when they're, you know, going to their appointments for the pediatrician, et cetera, that can just give, you know, a little that from like, the hands-on providers. So that's something that I'm assessing what the parents have as far as accessibility to those types of supports. It's just even something as simple as you have, we're encouraging the patient to get, you know, a lockbox for the medical marijuana, other Suboxone, or something that keeps that medication out of the hands of the little ones, you know, that are going to be there pretty soon. Showing the parents that thinking ahead and with an eye towards safety. So, you know, those are really the main things that I'm assessing. I want to also support the children getting home with the parents as soon as possible. Another example of a helpful, you know, recommendation that you could be making as a provider is focusing on, I know here in Rhode Island, we have the Department of Health programs that the families can be involved in, like a Healthy Families America, early intervention, that are not funded by DCYF, that can continue whether the case is open at all, or even after the case closes. But from the guardian's perspective, you know, that's obviously mandated supporters and reporters that have eyes on the family, that are going out to the home, that are keeping an eye on the kids, just to make sure that the treatment and the sobriety is continuing after the child has been reunified. So, you know, I just also want to say that the hope is to reunify quickly, but at the same time, you know, the trauma of the child going home and then it not working and the kid having to come back out happens a lot, and it's just so detrimental to the child and their future. And when I represent the teenagers, you know, that have been in and out of the parents' homes for so many years of their life, and that's the thing that they look back on, you know, that is such a trying and upsetting time for them. So safety plans, which the department has been really utilizing a lot, and we rely on as guardians 100%, is having those natural supports, if it's community provider, but also the family supports, the friends, even, you know, if the parent goes to temple or church and there's somebody there that they can use and reach out to and lean on to be included as part of that safety plan. And the department literally writes up a handwritten document. Everybody reviews it, everybody commits to a certain number of check-ins with the child once the child is reunified. Everybody signs it, it's filed in court, I have it, I review it, like I approve it as well. So it's a lot of eyes on the family, and families, the kids, when they go home with those really solid safety plans and procedure plans, when they go home, really seem to like have the lasting reunification and don't reopen again. So those are the things that I try to focus on and try to make sure are part of the plan to the children that I represent.
That's all really helpful in sort of thinking about both the work that you teach to on a daily basis and sort of other people that you're interacting with. Director Deckert sort of talked about some of the embedded sort of systemic lens, or what can we, how can we think about changing cultures and systems that have been embedded with racism, with a lot of bias about substance use, with a lot of biases about socioeconomic status, like a lot of different things come into play, really in all of these systems, whether it's child welfare system. So one of the things that you all have sort of touched on is that history plays a huge role in this. It plays a role in terms of the cultures that exist. It plays a role in the lack of trust that many people feel in the systems, and that can, complicate things like a patient not wanting to engage, as Dr. Sutter talked about. We often, as many of you talked about, don't think enough about the trauma and the experiences, whether it's previous DCYF experience that the parent had themselves, or whether it's other kinds of trauma. So as we think about rebuilding these systems, whether we abolish it and start over, or we try to, take the pieces of what we have and kind of move forward in the direction we want to, I'd love to hear from each of you sort of what would you like to see implemented as one or two systems changes that could really improve the way that we take care of and support moms with substance use disorders and their families. So I'm going to mix up the order a little bit. Director Deckert, I'll start with you on that one. Thank you.
So one of the things that I think could be a pretty concrete systems change is the red flag in the system. I think I would imagine, and again, I'm new to this state just since April. We didn't have something like that in Illinois, so I'm going to make some assumptions about if I were a social caseworker, what I would feel in terms of seeing something as a red flag in our system, right? And I think the immediate thing would be hiding, especially depending on how frequently you've had contact with that family, if this is an intergenerational family, and the idea of being you can't help but that implicit or even explicit bias happening immediately. Oh, well, here's that family. We know all her kids came into care. We're gonna go out here and see that, but like I've heard, as an investigator in Illinois, I've heard those conversations where people will make decisions about removals before they even have the information ahead of them. It happens. And so if a pretty concrete thing, we're in the midst of going from riches, which ain't so rich, and really back a computer system to a new comprehensive child welfare information system is getting rid of red flags. And it doesn't mean that history isn't important, right? Because we have to have some understanding of past in order to help plan. But it shouldn't be that this is what we rest our decisions on wholly. It has to be about the progress made in the present. We're in the midst of doing listening and learning towards across the state, and I was in the judges forum, and I believe it was one of the judges who mentioned that we don't, even in our court reports, the language, it might have been you, Judge Leah, that we're saying has that are like just the language changes, and if there has been progress made with a parent, how important it is for them to see that this is something that did happen, but this is not where they're at right now, and how reinforcing it is for them as a parent to know that they're doing well, as opposed to people keep going back to their past. So that's one thing. Another shift that I would like to see, I think is already in the midst of it, and I think it's the beauty of the family court. Again, I go back to the size of the state, because in Illinois with so many counties, so many jurisdictions, so many courts, you don't get the level of engagement in those courts in the way that we have here in Rhode Island. and the ability for one system to hold the other system accountable. So even if we're coming in, you know, and our red flag, my removal of the red flag didn't work, and there's still some bias that's present, we'll have someone like Judge Leah who will ask the right question and say, no, you don't have the burden of proof, that baby needs to go back home. And so I think if we can have that spread from, you know, family court judge to family court judge, because there's some checks and balances in that. Because we're not gonna always do everything perfectly as much as I want us to. And so we need those levers to, you know, do the pushing and pulling so that we are doing what's best for kids and families. And the reality is sometimes, and I think all of us in this room know that sometimes the reality is a removal might be what's necessary to keep a baby safe, but it doesn't stop us from having to do the work to engage that parent and motivate them to do better.
Jocelyn, what do you think from your perspective, other than having $1 million to support more in the work?
So, I think, to make a difference is, I think healthcare providers actually needs to be more involved. I don't see too many healthcare providers, when it comes to substance abuse. I feel as though there's a lot of biases around substance abuse within the healthcare system. And, I think having the healthcare involved in some of these cases will, you know, we'll have better collaboration in regards to working with other providers and helping the mom get to a place where she needs to be. I also feel as though the services, the amount of services that these moms have can be very overwhelming, you know, and a lot of the services are duplicated services. And we're all doing the same thing. So a mom can have 5 or 6 different providers, but all of the providers are providing the same services. That can be very overwhelming for a mom to deal with on a daily basis. So I got your less services, you know.
Work very much. That's the problem with our system, we have these service plans. Sometimes they're a little cookie cutter, and you have to have therapy, and you have to have this, all these things that you must do in order for your child come back, but it that would be overwhelming for me.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the other, you know, more intervention instead of removing a child from the mother's care. Let's work on interventions in order to keep the child with the mother and not have to be with them from care.
Actually, I'm gonna pick up on a point just because you made it and Director Deckert sort of did too, which is, you know, often the way this has worked, I think, with child welfare systems is that we have this checklist of we need to do X, Y, and Z before we'll even consider reunification. And so then the service becomes a kind of punitive thing as opposed to something that's really, I mean, I'm not saying the service providers are punitive, but the idea of it is sort of you have to do this. As opposed to how can we do this in a more supportive way? So I wonder, this is really for everyone, you know, how do we change, how do we shift that thinking both in the systems, but also in the way that's presented to moms that they're taking advantage of services,
That case plan, which Director Deckert speaks of those tasks that do duplicate a great deal. The case plan, once the case comes in, becomes a court order once the case is so-called adjudicated, right? And so I then feel that it belongs to me. So I can pull the tree as we go along, you know, so if somebody who's actually working with the parents says, well, they're already doing this, but they've been referred to Safe Care, but they already have Help with Families America. And I'm thinking, you know, do you really need all these ladies and sometimes gents in your life, strangers coming to your door to check your outlets and, you know, I don't know, make sure you have a pack and play or, you know, I mean, it does get, maybe it's a luxury we have that we sometimes find ourselves duplicating, and that's another way to look at it. But, you know, just because it's not on a stone tablet, just because it's in a case plan, and that's where it's so helpful to me, just as Ms. Cuddy said, to have providers tell me, actually, you know, Susie's doing great with this direct stuff, or I don't think this is gonna be needed because the progress is really strong, and let's let somebody else take that program, you know, who's on a waiting list for it, you know, so I think if we can get out of the mindset that, you know, we thought this was needed in the beginning, so it must be, you know, I mean, we're all human beings, we should be talking the way through. And once again, I just get back to listening to the parents saying, you know, maybe I haven't had a child before, but I was taking care of my nieces and nephews my whole life, and I know what to do. And, you know, listen to that and let the parent display that and trust it a little bit. I think we can, you know, as I like to say, prune the tree. But I really think just to kind of circle back to some of the points that others have made, that trust issue of the parent even feeling free enough to speak up and say, this is what I need and this is what I don't need. We don't have a history of listening to that. You know, we have a history of telling, and telling feels punitive right out of the gate. You know, you need to do this because this happened, or you have this history, and that doesn't create buy-in, and it's not safer, you know. And I think the example that Dr. Mary Beth gave of the individual she's trying to keep contact with, such a perilous situation. I wish that were an isolated story, but we have moms who give birth at home in their bathtub because they are trying to avoid getting their child cold, you know, and that's not safer. I mean, as well as I know, you know, so, or we have people who are afraid to go to prenatal care because they know they have that history of there. So we haven't made it safer. And if we could let the parent have more of a voice and say, who are your natural supports, not whom do we approve of? You know, say, okay, someone had a DCYF history, maybe auntie did, but maybe she's changed her life. The judge can override that rule out and say, okay, this person can be in the support system because in fact, they might be the greatest resource, having walked through the fire themselves. Maybe that's the person we wanted to have. You know, so I just think it's really about being willing to customize based on real information in real time from people working with the family, listening to the parent. And, you know, I just love this trend that's really already starting to be very real of the department being able to hear that too. And I think we are turning the page in real time right now on so many of these things, which is what makes this forum so timely. It's not aspirational, it's actual, it's happening now. So I think that having our systems change, we are the systems in this room. We're it, you know, and so I think so, you know, little self-examination here and there, never hurt anybody, you know, so I'm not afraid to be corrected. I mean, mostly parents. I find when I represented parents, they told me off in the hall a lot better than they do now in the room. I get the idea. You know, so.
But if I think you made a really good point about their voice being heard. One of the things to go back to systemic change that that I believe will be helpful, but I would have to bring the model here, Rhode Island, DCYF, is child and family teaming. In Illinois, there's an entire model around child and family team meetings, and it's actually led by the parents. So they come into the situation, they bring their natural supports, the child is present when appropriate, and they're setting the tone for their life, what they want. They're expressing what their service plan should look like, what service they feel like they should need. And I think that's missing here. I don't think we do child and family teaming very well. And I think that could lead to pregnancy occurring quicker. And families feeling like they can have a voice and choice in this process. And the second thing I want to highlight is behavioral change. And it goes back to the cookie cutter list, right? So I'll give an example of my late grandfather. He was an avid smoker. Several times a day. And he had a heart attack, had to have open heart surgery, and he stopped smoking cold turkey. Now I know it takes a special person to some extent to do that, but the point is, he didn't need nicotine patches. He didn't need, a class to teach him how to do that. He changed his behavior. And so I think the same applies to a parent who has all these lists of services that they're having to complete. But if it's been 6 months and you see the behavior change, you're talking to that one therapist that's saying she shifts the way that she thought about this, or, she's got her apartment and, she cut off that one guy that was really detrimental to her. For me, that's what we want to see. I don't know that I personally care about her taking a parenting class and all these things that we feel like people need in order for change to happen. I think individualizing that assessment and seeing where the changes happen and going with that as opposed to this checklist that just wasn't done is what I think is important.
So, Mary Beth, from a clinical perspective, and Jocelyn mentioned that she's had experiences with healthcare providers that maybe don't really understand substance use disorder, or at least aren't supportive of the parent in this moment in a way that might be helpful. How do you think about systems change in healthcare?
Yeah, I'm sorry that happens. I mean, I think in an ideal world, there is much more communication amongst medical systems and from medical systems to the community. I think that's something that really doesn't go very well here, even though the state is shockingly small. Something I've tried to do on my own, but I think that, it's not sort of commonplace. And family medicine, that's just sort of in our nature, right? So we go and we talk to the OBs and we talk to the pediatricians, and we are part of the community at Baselines, and we know that. When I was in New Mexico in fellowship, where I did OB and addiction training, we had a really comprehensive program that went from primary care, prenatal care, postpartum care, the inpatient setting for the mom and the child, and then primary care forever else for everyone in the family until they didn't want to come anymore. And I think that really represents the ideal model, right? And it wasn't just family docs. We had some higher risk OB docs in that clinic. We had some pediatricians. We had some internal med people, psychiatrists. We had a social worker. And because it was based at the university, we did have like better connections to some of the community organizations that were working with our families. I was routinely asked to represent families in court. We talked with DCF or CYFD, it's called there, but so I think it's just the communication, right? Because like you said, a lot of people are duplicating things. Like I might be sending my patient for therapy that you might I think if we all talk to each other, that it would all be a lot better. And I think it mirrors substance use itself, right? It's all about community, and that isolation and that lack of communication is when problems can persist. The other thing I want to say is that I'm so happy to hear about this red flag. It's just like, yeah. Yeah. Oh, for better safe. Sorry, right? Like it's not having some guts to give people a chance. It's huge. Because the red flag, not only does it create bias internally in DCYF, but that paper is like broadcasted to the whole state, right? So someone showing up in labor and it's like literally in your face, like, that colors the reaction you're gonna have with your nurse, with the person that's ordering your baby, with the pediatrician. It's just, again, it's like we're not even giving people a chance. So I really like that with you.
I just want to talk about that just a little bit, because I think there are other parts of our system that have to take accountability for why red flags exist to begin with, and why people are more willing to err on the side of the caution than to take risk. And it's because one bad thing happened, it gets blasted across the media, and that becomes the focus, and everybody who doesn't know our system believes that that's what happens to kids all the time. And the reality is that's actually a very rare thing to happen. And so there becomes this fear around self-preservation, let's be honest with you. And I just happen to have enough that's because I can get fired quicker than a social caseworker can. But I think that there's this fear that if something bad happens on my watch, then I'm gonna be held, I'm gonna get in trouble, I'm gonna lose my job. Now they're prosecuting, social caseworkers for negligence if they miss something. So I think we also have to recognize that those things exist for a reason, and also work with those systems to think differently about what the reaction is. No one wants a child to die. We're not in this work because of that. Like, we want every child to be safe. And the reality is that unfortunately, unless you're there 24/7, which is completely impossible, unfortunately, bad things will happen. That's the reality of our work. So I think, again, along with changing the red flag, I'm gonna get rid of that dang old red flag, but we have to start communicating with other systems so that there's a different approach to when something like that. Unless it really is negligence.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, in the last 6 years that I've been working with kids in the child welfare system, not gonna because of all the supports and safety plans in place, none of the, kids have died and very few have gotten hurt, but a lot of moms have died, like many, right? So the support needs to focus helping them in this area, right? And then just to add to it, as far as just a little plug for the kids too, is there, and I think it's right, you talked about this, Director Deckert as well, is there are no programs in Rhode Island residential treatment level beds for kids with substance use disorders. And a lot of this recurring in the system and the distrust because they grew up in the system and now they're grown-ups and the kids are getting taken away. They haven't gotten the treatment that they really needed when they were teenagers. So I just would, for obviously the department and just the statewide leaders, anybody that's listening, that we really do need those programs for the kids in order to, really make a difference on this going forward.
Yeah, I think that's part of the siloed issue. So like substance use, adolescent substance use treatment falls under our BHDDH system. And so it's not something that but I think I was at a meeting, I said, I'll do it, I'll take it. Because there's this idea that maybe if I had it, I have control over it and I can just like try to get it done as quickly as possible because there's this I don't have control over that. And that's very frustrating. But what I do have control over is pulling people to the table and having conversations and holding them to counsel. So
I want to preserve, we have a little more than 10 minutes left, and I know there are questions, and I see one right here, so please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. This is such a breath of fresh air. Getting to talk. I'm so elated. My name is Bob Aswad. I'm currently here in Providence, and I'm both a pediatrician and a psychiatrist. So you can imagine how, like, seeing this, obviously, as a psychiatrist, I feel sometimes like I'm just flying in the dark, trying to like support oftentimes moms and sometimes fathers, like kind of navigating the system. But what I'm really interested in especially Director Deckert, I feel like your vision and the way you want to shape the program is really meaningful for me because as a pediatrician working in women and infants hospitals, so for everyone else, like we have one major birthing hospital for the entire state, and you find nurses asking you, pressuring you as a pediatrician, as a pediatric resident, screen this mom, XYZ, red flag, all this type of like behavior that it is part of what you mentioned, Judge, about the protecting yourself, but also like all the different biases that come through. So I'm really curious, especially, I know, was it Jocelyn mentioning like you wanted to see more providers at the table? My question is like, as we're laying out this new vision, how do you sort of see dedicated spaces of inviting providers in to know what the new vision is so that people are not relying on a lot of their sort of old practices, which we know it's going to take some time for like the uptake to kind of let those old practices die and try to create a more supportive system.
So first thing I can think about is you have to mark down that we want to have a forum with you all through our listening and learning because we're in the midst of doing listening and learning, and what will come from that is a strategic plan that will be widely shared. But being able to come in spaces and hear from you all around what's working and what's not working and what your wish list is and how things need to change. And the exchange of information back to the spaces and being able to tell people, well, here's how we're hoping you can approach the work. Here's our support and response unit line. You don't have to call the hotline anymore if you just have, if it doesn't rise to the level of a suspicion of abuse and neglect. So I think training. So making sure that we make the connection so that if you're identifying that in your hospital space and you guys have in services or some sort of training opportunities that you have to have, you can reach out to me and say, hey, can you come and give us a training on this? And that's an opportunity to educate and get people to be a part of the shift that's happening. So if you'd like to exchange cards afterwards and you want us to come in and do trainings or conversations or discussions or panels, we're more than willing to.
Yes, please. Pediatric residents, I cannot tell you enough how this, like, it is the most trial by fire of all of our pediatric residents is learning how to say no to nurses. It's our ethics and our value, because we're being told to essentially alienate this parent and then also harm this child. But to say that if we don't do it, then we're harming the child, and that it's just.
I'd love to come and dispel that.
Hi, so I'm from Cleveland and I am family doc and an addiction medicine doc, and I work in our moms program there. And I want to thank you all. I love how forward thinking you are and appreciate all your different insights. My question, I totally agree about the idea of pruning the plan, because that's one of the big pitfalls I see is like they're running here, they're running there, they're dropping for this person, they're dropping urine for that person. So I love that idea. The flip side of it is one of the other pitfalls I often see is that at the end, like they get custody back, they, get finished sober living, drug court case closes, and then it all goes away. And I just sort of wonder how you guys deal with that here in Providence. Like, how do you sort of gradually remove services, but still sort of offer that support and wraparound care after the crisis is over, but the tough part of parenting is happening?
Mm-hmm. And that's a huge deal, because I'm on the state perinatal death review committee, and that's our state's #1 cause of death is overdose. And often they were like 4, 6, 8 months postpartum, right? Exactly what you say, when everything's done, except for family medicine.
I have a thought.
I think, well, I was just gonna say that the model of the family treatment, seems to be recovery court, is that it's 12 months. I mean, there are some exceptions where someone might quote unquote graduate in 11, but it's just to say, those last couple months or days, okay, you did everything, but how's it going? I'd rather have that safety net for 2 more months when it's like, I don't know, a little boring, good, everything's going, you're just exhausted from doing all the regular stuff that still exists after you went to all these appointments. And also, our chief, when he created the Safe and Secure Baby Court, and we try to translate this model to the family treatment court as well. How many community-based supports can we bake in along the way? So it's not all or nothing, just those DCYF referrals. The family tends to have more buy-in because it's something community-based, and it doesn't require the case to remain open legally with the department to sustain it. So just as Ms. Cuddy said, those folks are, not that we're leaving people behind to like watch the family. I don't think that's a message I want to send, but that you have a resource even after this closes, or you can call back. And we've had people call back with, my case has been open, but my partner relapsed. So who can I go to? I'd rather have one of our care coordinators at the court or the social worker who was on the case when it closed get that call than the hotline call. Like make the relationship respectful enough where people aren't afraid to reach out when something is not going great. If all they think is, oh, this cascade's gonna come on me if I make that call for help, nobody called. If they feel like it's gonna be genuine, they made a connection with the providers. You take the fear factor out, and it's like any of us, we all need help with things from time to time. After, especially with little kids, or how do I find this, or that my daycare closed, before it starts to snowball, like in that way. So I think that's case by case a trust issue for the family, but I think that's how you mitigate against that kind of all or nothing feeling that you're speaking about, which I think is very real. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I wanted to make sure I wasn't talking too much. So one of the things that I've learned that Rhode Island does here is what's called the Port of Reunification. And so when a child or children are reunified with their family, the case doesn't close right away. There is some form of aftercare and support that the social caseworker continues to engage the family in, just to make sure that things are transitioning well and that they're essentially doing so well that we can get to a point where you can close the case and there's no repeat maltreatment, or they don't have to come back into foster care as a worst case scenario. And also, we do have a lot of, I think we have a robust, prevention system, so it's called a Family Community Care Partnership. We have about 5 of them across the state. They're truly meant to be preventative in nature, so it's when someone calls our warm line and a family just needs help, that Family Community Care Partnership worker will go out and say, hey, here's what we can do to help. You don't need to have a case open with the department, which is what people fear, right? No one wants their name to be associated with the department. And so the unique thing with we call them FCTPs. The unique thing with the FCTPs is the family can have an open service case with them without it being tied to the department. And I think in situations where there's support of reunification, cases closed, there's no preventing us from saying, also, if you want this additional lingering support in this way, this community setting is available to you. So I think we have some things in place that helps with some form of transition, so it's not just like we're cutting people off.
Yeah, and I'm just also gonna add a little bit to that. Here at Amos House, the moms who are in the mother-child reunification program, they are able to stay in the program for 1 year or more. And once we have plenty of moms who have their DCYF closed, case closed while in the program, and still receive the supportive services.
I think that's probably one more.
I just it's on that topic. All right, so I don't want to say what state I'm from because we're being broadcast, but it might be New Jersey. But you guys are very progressive. I'm not saying New Jersey is punitive, that's not the part of the behavioral health world that I work in. But I've seen cases where it's a few of them where it's taken so long for the reunification that the mom has felt 3 cases like this. Such a good recovery support and, going to meetings, for example, like every day and really just changing her life around. And then finally, like years later, literally, here's your kids back. And now she has no time left. And so that is definitely, I don't know, not really a question, but definitely a challenge I've seen in New Jersey because, now everything they've built, their support is really not there anymore because now they're taking care of their kids. And just a comment.
That would be exactly what I'm wanting to say. I have an operational question. So I'm an emergency medicine in Florida. A member of my team relapsed, which led to a renewal. And she has been doing everything under the sun that she's supposed to be doing. And they're not pleased that she keeps passing her drug tests. So now they sent her for a hair follicle test because I think then she was and I went into work the other day and she's sobbing in the conference room because they still won't get her kids back. Like, what recourse do you have when they refuse reunification and it's not the appropriate decision? Can you hire a lawyer? How do you push back?
That's awful, by the way.
I'm ready to take out a lawyer myself.
Title to legal counsel because your right to parent is a constitutional right, so it's in jeopardy. Are appointed a counsel if you can't afford one. So I mean that my first answer would have been they need to call their lawyer. But I think, or ask the court to appoint somebody, but I just think that the suffering and frustration of this person, who's the parent, the kids, damage to the kids of not being that with their mom and still having supervised visitation. By the way, we've spoken all about moms and everything we talked about is dads too. And so I don't need to make that like a footnote, but they're completely baked into the special. Of course, they just don't, they're actually giving birth in the hospital, kind of all involved with that. But I think that what we're not recognizing is that she's hurting, but the kids, that's still the mom they love, even if she was, had something she had to deal with. And I just think that's unconscionable. I mean, I don't know how you repair the relationship when that much time has passed. And that's what the fallacy of that old model of fix everything in the world and then you'll get an extra hour of visitation. It's just I don't know about Florida law.
Well, I think it goes for child welfare professionals or child and family well-being professionals. It goes back to understanding that. So did she relapse and she had a plan for her kid, right? So that's different. So if mom has 3 kids and she called grandma over to watch them and she went partying and she relapsed, that's a very different scenario. Right, and so like and that goes back to this idea that a parent has to be a perfect parent, and I think people have to start looking at safety differently. And that coming up with a plan is her being safe for her kid.
Yeah.
And then the other stuff comes with support and going back to a meeting and, so that's really unfortunate, but I hope that, and I can't say that that would never happen here in Rhode Island, because unfortunately I'm in a position where I can see what people do every day and the decisions that they make, but if that ever came to my attention, I would be mortified and would have to do something about it, so.
I'm gonna end there. I want to just thank this incredible panel.
Back to your own states, we are progressive, but we still have work to do here.
Thank you.
Yeah.